Just to visit this on the K, bro. I was taking money cause I'm very super ultimate, hyper awesome, do you another way, bro? And pull up on it, pop it like a tic-tac. This is America, I can own a gun. I went into the bathroom and I put it and I poop it and I peep it on the ground and I'm awesome. Yeah, I've been in this cut, watch him drop. I am awesome and I really want little Kevin Honest angry bear haircut. Make me stop, pull up with an iPad, then I'm gonna play Angry Birds on my iPad. Yeah, I'm awesome, do the macaroni with it and it, poo-poo it and I'm my grandson. Yeah, skinny, I do not have a grandson. Take a visit and I hold him on ransom. Man, what if I did have a grandson?
How's it going, guys, and welcome back to another build video, this one on a very fun build that I've been messing around with for quite some time now, that being a rocket launcher focused flak build. Now this build came from my want of a one-shot flak build, like, you know, pistols and snipers and that sort of shit, but unfortunately flak isn't very good at that sort of stuff. What I did find though was that flak is incredibly good with rocket launchers, and that kind of does satiate the need for a bit of a one-shot build, especially while you're using things like a kick charger or a nukem. And this isn't like some goofy sort of meme for fun build. No, this actually is able to take on pretty much all of the content in the game and do it surprisingly well. This is a very solid build that is able to keep up with a lot of other options out there. But with that all being said, let's get into the build. So starting off with our red tree, there's a couple pretty big pickups here. The first being Leave No Trace. Leave No Trace is very important, as with rocket launchers, of course, you have a very limited ammo supply and you can be running low very quickly. Leave No Trace remedies this pretty heavily. While it's not a perfect fix for most launchers, this does work very well with multi-pellet launchers. Things like the Mongol or the Yellow Cake or the Creamer are incredibly good with Leave No Trace, as you're pretty much guaranteed to get some ammo back. Or anything with just very large AoE like the Nukem. Everything else in the red tree is pretty standard. Of course, we get Interplanetary Stalker, Hunter's Eye, Big Game, The Most Dangerous Game, Galactic Shadow, and Megavore, which lets everything that we do have a chance to crit. But we also pick up Two Fang, however this isn't exactly necessary. Two Fang I find to be better with fast firing guns, because that 25%, while it sounds like a decent bit being 1 in 4, I do find that there is the possibility for going a very long time without actually seeing one of these extra projectiles, and while it is very good for rocket launchers that have lower projectile counts with very large damage on them, or being that there is also a lot of rocket launchers with unlisted projectiles which Two Fang multiplies, if you find that you have lower action stall uptime than you would like, you can take points out of Two Fang and put them into head count instead. I personally still just run Two Fang, as I do prefer just having that extra damage potential, and I don't find that my fadeaways have too much time between them. So generally, I'm not a huge fan of head count. However, if you prefer being in fadeaway more often than you feel that you are with this build, head count is definitely a potential fix for that. Coming to our green tree, this is our second most important tree. Of course, as I mentioned before, we are using fadeaway and taking Not My Circus and Until You Are Dead. Not My Circus is just very solid crowd control to keep aggro off of flak, as flak does still suffer from some survivability issues, and Not My Circus is a good help for that. And Until You Are Dead just gives us a little bit more utility out of fadeaway. Gorillas in the Mist isn't that great because this lowers our overall damage, and we aren't really using fast firing guns to really take advantage of this, and 3-shot fadeaway is definitely more beneficial to us, especially because we are able to use some ASEs with it. Unblinking Eye is also just kind of difficult and awkward to use with this build. While it can still function, it's just not a great option, as this is usually for Gorillas in the Mist builds, to just completely spam those Unblinking Eye procs out. As for the rest of the tree, again, it's pretty standard stuff. Self-repairing system, Eager to Impress, Lick the Wounds. Again, flak still suffers survivability issues. Lick the Wounds definitely helps, especially with rocket launchers, where as you're getting the hang of them, you will probably down yourself a decent bit. Turn Tail and Run, definitely a very good skill, as this does give us more damage. However, it is worth keeping in mind that while using this skill, you do want to stand still for your firing. Fast and the Furious, more gun damage. Movement speed is also incredibly nice for this build, as repositioning and just getting around the battlefield is very important. Hidden Machine for just more damage. This synergizes well with fadeaway and also Not My Circus. And then we put 2 points into Rage and Recover just to kind of get down to the power inside and also give us a little bit more survivability. There's also 1 point up here in Sikkim. This is just to move further down the tree. This can really go anywhere. I just find that Sikkim is really just the best place to put it, as 1 point into all my BF BFF's Overclocked or Furious Attack isn't that amazing. And then finally we go to Blue Tree, where again this is pretty standard stuff. We take Persistence Hunter to get more flak damage and put 1 point into Ferocity and 1 point into Go for the Eyes, as this is just the best skill distribution to both get down and also get a little bit more damage out of Pet. We then put 1 point into He Bites and 5 points into Frenzy, as He Bites will actually stack Frenzy and you will pretty much always be stacked up on that Frenzy, giving you a decent damage boost. Who Rescued Who also synergizes very well with He Bites, as it's always proccing this as well, so that's a little bit more added survivability. We then grab Psycho Head on a Stick, as this just gives Pet some added bonuses, and is just the best option to move down to Barbaric Yomp. Unfortunately, we don't have enough points to max out Barbaric Yomp, however getting a 120% bonus is definitely still quite nice, especially since we're using Great Horn Stag, which just gives us a shit ton of raw damage. Great Horn Stag is generally the best pet option for this build, however if you are using a lot of elemental damage, the Spider Ant Scorcher is potentially better, and it is definitely worth just taking a look and comparing between these two yourself to see which one works out for the way that you have your current build set up. And we have nothing in Purple Tree. So coming to our gear for the class mod, we use the Cosmic Stalker, as I have tried the Bounty Hunter and the Deadeye and a couple different options, but the Stalker honestly just feels the best for builds like this that are focused on just very big upfront raw damage. It has the highest one-shot potential, as it just gives us so damn much. The rolls, of course, that you want here are splash damage, heavy weapon damage, things like that. Unfortunately, I definitely am lacking on the best option here, but you just want raw damage on your passives. There's really only two things I ever swamp between for my relic, and that is a Toboggan and a Cut Purse Launchpad. The Toboggan is very good if you just really need that upfront damage. You always want to be sliding around before standing up, standing still, and popping off a massive fucking shot onto those fellas. Although in heavier mobbing sections, the Cut Purse Launchpad is very important, as you can just slam down anywhere, and the rockets that this launch out will pretty much instantly refill your entire ammo pool. The damage from the Toboggan isn't necessarily needed for most sections where you could just have a Cut Purse Launchpad on you anyways, but generally for like takedowns and such, you can actually get through a large portion of the sections just using the Toboggan. If you don't like the slidey playstyle of the Toboggan, you can also use a Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge as a much more standard playstyle. However, if you don't have access to DLC, then you can just use a Snowdrift Victory Rush, as the Snowdrift provides you with that mobility, and the Victory Rush is a pretty nice damage boost. General rolls that you're looking for on your relic is pretty similar, just heavy weapon damage, maybe some elemental damage, and AoE damage. If you'd like more info on potential roles for your class mod and your relic, I'll have a couple links to some spreadsheets that go over just that in the description of this video. Now you have a couple options for grenades. Generally for mobbing, I find the Mesmer to be the best, simply because it offers a bit of crowd control for us, which again we are sorely lacking in the survivability department, and this can help out a hell of a lot. It also interacts well with Hidden Machine, as that makes it so that even more enemies will not be targeting you, and that's even more enemies you will be getting a damage boost towards. However, against bosses, the It's Piss is a very solid option, as this will just increase the damage that they take from you by 20% if you hit them with it. Although if you do decide to distribute your points into head count, then the Hunter Seeker is also a very solid option, as this is a very easy and simple way to spam out potential crits, which negate your access to back far quicker. For the Anointment, I tend to use On Grenade Throw, as it is a very large damage boost, being V2 damage, meaning it's multiplicative with a hell of a lot of your damage. However, using an ASE is also pretty solid, as this will proc after fadeaway and on the last shot of your fadeaway. It does end up coming down to preference, and again, the different specifications of your build, so testing out which one gives you more damage is definitely important here. But finally, onto our shields, there is really only one option, and it is the Revolter for general mobbing and just general play. I really thought the Infernal Wish was going to edge this out, as the Infernal Wish is just an extra projectile, giving you a shit ton of damage, and multiplying your potential projectiles, as I mentioned with Two Fang on unlisted projectile weapons. But unfortunately, the Revolter is just too fucking broken to pass up. So using a Ash Break Revolter so that it activates right on the start of your fadeaway, you get it all throughout your fadeaway. It's just too good. However, the Infernal Wish is definitely still worth to keep around, as against things like Psycho Reaver or just very large one type of health bars, where you just need a hell of a lot of that one damage type, an Infernal Wish is better, as it will outdamage a Revolter in those scenarios. I did also give the 0.M a try, however, it's kind of alright when you get that amp shot, but it's just not consistent enough, and flat kind of doesn't have enough ways to keep it up enough to really make use of what it can offer, so while it is an option, I wouldn't super recommend it. The 0.M is however good enough if you want to keep this build base game friendly. However, in that case, you could also go the route of maybe like a snowshoe and an icebreaker victory rush for a hell of a lot of damage and crowd control. And moving on to our gear, let's go over anointments first, as there are some options here. Generally, I swap between fadeaway 150, ASE splash, consecutive hits or a kill stack, and 150 over 90. All of these have their uses and are better on specific weapons. Fadeaway 150 and ASE splash are by far the best for just big single damage hit to chunk an HP bar of a boss. Things like Wotan, Scourge, Anathema, etc. Things that you can't really one-shot but just have to chunk down bit by bit, that's what these two are better for. Both are pretty interchangeable, and in my testing I found barely any difference between them damage-wise. However, I do tend to prefer fadeaway 150 as it's just more consistent and easier to use, whereas ASE splash, you have to wait for that last shot of your fadeaway and then you need to wait for it to cool down. So I do just prefer fadeaway for a majority of uses. 150 over 90, however, is very good with things like the kick charger or just anything that has that one big shot of huge burst damage like the nukem, and is your strongest option for bossing against things that can be killed just straight from 100 to 0 with no immunity phases whatsoever. This gives you so much more damage, as this is multiplying all of your damage, being V2 damage itself as well. So this is really just an insane anointment. It just has specific use cases. And then finally we have consecutive hits and kill stack. Both of these are very strong for mobbing. Whichever one you decide to use doesn't really matter. It's kind of just personal preference. However, I do find that consecutive hits is very good on things like the Mongol, although this will stack off of all of your damage, including dots, so it'll pretty much always be up. Kill stack, while offering higher potential damage, you do need to keep up your killing. Although I do use both interchangeably, again, completely dependent on just what gun I'm using. But speaking of guns that I'm using, let's get onto that, because there are a hell of a lot of options, and I honestly use pretty much every rocket launcher that exists in the game. This build is crazy, and the rocket launcher choice is insane. So I'm not going to go over each and every one individually, but I will showcase some of the ones that I found to be the absolute best of the best. Starting off with the yellow cake, as the yellow cake is pretty much just a fucking fantastic overall gun for mobbing and bossing alike. This thing will just absolutely clap ass of anything that you point it at, and with Leaf No Trace, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a couple ammo back if you sweet spot this thing correctly, due to how many projectiles that it splits into. The Mongol is also a very solid option. This also has a hell of a lot of unlisted projectiles and does a decent bit of damage, and is similarly also very good for both bossing and mobbing. It's also just a hell of a lot of fun, and speaking of fun, the Freeman. This was a surprise to me. I've heard good things about this gun, but I never really had a place to test it out and use it myself, and holy fuck, this is incredible. And of course, the nukem, potentially the most fun thing to use with this build, sliding around, building up that massive one-shot, and just nuking an entire fucking area of enemies. This thing is a hell of a lot of fun. Though a couple other honorable mentions, of course. The Major Kong is incredibly good for very many bosses. This will just fucking ruin anything that you charge it up and shoot it at. The Creamer is a very fun one for mobbing. The Rocket Pod, again, a very fun one for mobbing. I do have a separate video on this gun that can give you a little bit more information, but this is also actually a very solid way to regain your ammo, weirdly enough, because it kind of has some buggy interactions that kind of result in some ammo regen. Again, there will be a video popping up somewhere in the corner. Globetrotters are very fun. Of course, the trio of the big alien barrels are also good. The Backburner, the Kick Charger, the Plague Bearer, all of those. The Hive is very fun for mobbing. The Plumage is also very fun. Again, literally any rocket launcher you can throw on this thing and have a good time with. But that's gonna about do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all of that. Down in the description will be a link to my Twitch channel where I'll be live right after this video goes up. And under that will be a link to my Discord server where you can find a download for the save file of this build. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.